Welcome back to the Hardware Unbox podcast for episode, I don't even know because we're at Computex, don't have the usual setup. But yeah, we're filming on location this episode. We're here in Taipei live, though not live by the time this recording goes out. But anyway, it's a podcast. So if it sounds a little different to the previous episodes, that's because we're currently sitting on top of our hotel where the pool area is. It's a bit windy, it's a bit, you get a bit of building sounds and those sorts of things. Hopefully it's okay.
It's the great outdoors, Tim.
It is the great outdoors. But,
there's wind and stuff, so enjoy that in your eardrums with your headphones on.
Yep, always love that. So yeah, we've been at Computex for the last week or so. The show floor days are now over by the time that we're filming this, so we've done all the main content at this point. We've seen the announcements from AMD mainly. NVIDIA was a bit of a nothing burger. There was Intel with a few things. And yeah, we're just gonna sit and chat about what we've seen at Computex, what's the show been like, and then potentially we'll have another couple of episodes here from Computex as well. We're planning to get Balin, our video editor, to come and share his thoughts about working at Hardware Unbox and Computex and those sorts of things in a future episode. But yeah, for now, Computex. So I guess we'll start with probably the most exciting announcement and the reason why we're excited to come to Computex this year, which was Zen 5. So I made the news video about Zen 5's announcements. What are your thoughts on what AMD's shown so far?
Oh, I think it's pretty exciting. I think it's pretty good. Obviously, first-party benchmarks, you don't want to get too excited about those.
Yeah.
I think the IPC improvement, 16%, I think that's reasonable. If that ends up being the actual IPC improvement, then I think I'll be happy with that. I don't know if it's a sandbagging type situation that, we heard that they might be sandbagging with, was it Zen 4? I think was it Zen 3?
Can't remember one of them.
It doesn't matter. And they sort of were. The IPC improvements were a bit larger than what AMD was indicating, and we always really expect it to be the other way around. So look, it could be 16%, could be 10%, could be 20%. Really hard to say at this point in time. So we're not exactly sure what the IPC gains are, but what they've claimed so far is pretty good.
Yeah, and I think the rumours that were suggesting crazy numbers like 40, 50% IPC gains, like those sorts of things are just never going to happen. Let's be real here. Would be an insane IPC gain, like unheard of across most generations. That's bulldozer to Zen 1.
Yeah, that's cherry-picked outliers that aren't relevant in an IPC conversation. It's like we have new instructions for this new workload and it makes it twice as fast or 40% faster, whatever the number is.
Yeah.
But it's like, kind of.
Yeah, and I think that's why people have to be very careful reporting on those type of leaks.
Yep.
Like, it's pretty easy to confuse information that's like, Zen 5 is up to twice as fast or 50% faster at the same clock speeds with the average gain people will be seeing, which is what we typically mean by IPC. The average gain is not 50%.
Yep.
So obviously Zen 5 does introduce areas which could be 50% or twice as fast. There's things like AVX 512 is significantly beefed up in the Zen 5 architecture. But yeah, that doesn't mean like gaming is going to be 50% faster or like your standard workload is going to be 50% faster. But yeah, like 16% is very much in the ballpark of what AMD's delivered.
Yeah, and we really have no idea for gaming. They showed Far Cry 6, I believe, 10% uplift there.
Yep.
So that's, I suppose, good. Whether that's the norm for gaming or the up to for gaming, not sure.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, it's very early still for Zen 5, so obviously while it was the announcement, we did get SKUs, which is good. They're not ready to talk about pricing, not really wanting to divulge much about performance. I think they only had one comparison. It was like the 7950X, 9950X versus the 14900K.
And that won't be the first time that happens.
Yeah, many mistakes happen there, but there was not too much performance data even compared to Zen 4 CPUs. So, they're not really saying how gaming is going to go, especially up against like an X3D part, because I think both of us don't really expect Zen 5 CPUs, the non-X3D models, to beat the 7800 X3D for gaming on average.
No, we have, again, very little information to draw from, and it's first-party benchmarks anyway. But there's been very little discussion about gaming performance, so it's hard to really have any sort of commentary around that. So we'll have to wait and see. Probably got a bit of a wait before we can actually comment on that.
But yeah, I mean, obviously there's other areas that AMD also needs to provide some information on, like pricing, which is probably not going to happen at Computex because the launch is I think we're expecting towards the end of July. You know, they've only announced July as the general time frame, but you know, what we're hearing is probably towards the end of that. And then obviously there's things like, you know, there's a bit of confusion around memory support and memory performance because they did announce X870 to provide higher memory speeds, but whether or not that's applicable to Zen 5 is pretty unclear. But we do know, you know, the CCDs, they're built on the TSMC 4 nanometer, so a small improvement, but basically the same process node as Zen 4. The I/O die, that's basically the same as what's been seen previously. So, you know, AMD are claiming like this is a big architectural change, one of the largest changes to Zen, but that seems to be more just the architecture. The other configuration side of things appears to be, you know, basically the same. Frequencies, core counts, I/O die, the platform's the same, DDR speed, you know, it's still DDR5 obviously and PCI 5.0. So, yeah, I mean, they're going to have, what, like a 3-month head start, we think, compared to Intel with Arrow Lake. So, yeah.
Yes, yeah, and I mean, they've already got a head start, really, because they're continuing on the same platform. So, those who have already invested in AM5, perhaps with a Ryzen 5 CPU, you may be eyeing off a Zen 5 X3D part, which will probably be coming, I would say, if I had to guess, probably early next year.
Yeah, so, CES I'd say is probably pretty likely.
So Intel will be away by then, but you just won't be interested if you're that particular buyer. There's a lot of things there still to play out, but as you were speaking about memory support and stuff like that, I think realistically, probably the biggest question I've seen from people is, I've got a 600 series board, you might have bought a Ryzen 5 processor or whatever it may be, and you're concerned that when you do upgrade to a Zen 5 part, that you won't be able to run at the full performance because your board won't support these alleged higher frequencies.
Yeah.
But I really don't think that's the case. If they do end up supporting higher frequencies with Zen 5 CPUs, I'm pretty sure pretty well the vast majority of AM5 boards will support higher memory frequencies. They're not limited to 6,000. That limitation, at least with the tighter ratios for maximum performance, that is a limit of the integrated memory controller. And we're not sure if there'll be any changes to that memory controller for Zen 5, whether there's any tweaks or tuning of it to help with higher frequencies, or you know, if they've in some way addressed whatever the limitation was to get a bit higher, you'll be able to run that higher spec memory on your 600 series boards. And after all, they are launching Zen 5 on 600 series boards.
I think that's a pretty good indication of why we won't see high memory speed support through X870, because while it hasn't been officially announced by AMD, a lot of the board partners at the show have told us that X870 will not be launching alongside the Zen 5 CPUs, probably coming maybe a month or two after the launch. As you said, you know, they're probably going to be launching on X670, and even AMD's demo systems that they had at the show,
they're all
those were all X670 systems. So you wouldn't want to be launching your brand new platform and new CPUs and not showing the best performance that those CPUs could provide. So the fact that they're willing to go with X670, not just delaying it a little bit or figuring out some way to make 800 series happen at the same time, I think that suggests that what you're going to be seeing with the latest BIOSes on those boards is the final performance of those CPUs. Again, like maybe AMD's Radeon division would tend more towards not releasing in the best possible light and then having to fix it later, but certainly their CPU division, it's not like they've done things like that. They tend to want it to get pretty close to the final performance at launch.
Yep. So yeah, I'm interested to see what we ultimately end up with. So we'll get more information leading up to the reviews, and then ultimately we'll get all the information with the reviews when they go live. So I'm keen for all of that. One of the funny stories I want to tell, or things that happened at Computex, which was pre-show, happened when we were visiting the AMD booth.
That's right.
So we were invited to the AMD, I guess it's their booth. They don't have a booth on the showroom floor, but they have a private suite. I believe it was in their office building. Yeah,
their office building's right next to the Computex trade show floor building.
Which happens to be right next to the hotel we've decided to stay in this year, so that's good. There's multiple hotels, so they'll never find us, Tim. But anyway, so we went there on the Monday, I want to say.
Before the show.
Before the show. And they were showing us the Zen 5 CPUs in action. Basically, there were Zen 5 powered PCs there, and we were free to play games on them, run some Cinebench benchmarks, all that sort of stuff. So that's kind of neat. And it was sort of a private tour for us. We went up there. We were the only media there. They'd booked us in for a time slot. Anyway, we played a few games, did that.
You can't really learn much,
Yep.
just no frame rate counter or anything. They're just like, oh, here's Avatar, play it.
Essentially, it worked. So we're like, okay, that was neat, I suppose. Not much was learnt there, but cool. And then we went around the corner to the Cinebench systems, and they had a 14900K versus the, the 9950X. Have I got that right?
Yep, that's right.
Yep. So that was cool, and we thought, okay, so they'd already run the 14900K pass, and the score was there, and it was within, I think, 10 points of our score that we put in our most updated content, so that all looked good. Then I looked over at the 9950X, and the score was lower, or about what we see from a 7950X. And they were like, so, you know, here we've got really close to the higher core count Intel CPU. I'm like, pretty sure that's
Like,
not
that doesn't sound right.
Yeah, you were pretty close with the 7950X. I would expect the 9950X to be outperforming the 14900K in Cinebench, because if you haven't achieved that, that is awkward. Plus, they'd already released information that they had.
Yeah, they showed benchmark charts in the day one, well, in the announcement, you know, slideshow or whatever, that showed, I think, Cinebench, I can't remember whether they were running the 2023 version or the 2024 version. The demo was the 2024 version. I can't remember exactly, but they were showing around that sort of 15 to 20% performance improvement between the 9950X and the 14900K. And they were also showing IPC gains between Zen 5 and Zen 4 in Cinebench. So with both of those, you know, first-party benchmarks that they were showing, the expectation was that the 9950X would be faster than a 14900K, because your benchmarks have shown the 7950X being very similar to the 14900K in that. They were showing multi-core, to be clear. It was not single-core, it was the multi-core test.
So straight away, that didn't make sense to me, so I queried them about that, and then sort of confusion ensued, and they started to go, oh, what's happened here? Basically, they shut that demo down and said, well, ignore that, delete any footage, there's something wrong there. I ran a few tests and looked at a few system configuration things and couldn't work out why it wasn't performing the way that it should be, and we left. Anyway, the next day, we heard from the AMD employee that they actually had a pre-production silicon. So although it was a 9950X, it was an early sample that wasn't, you know, complete. So it was an earlier stepping, and therefore the performance wasn't quite where it should be. So bit of an awkward moment there from AMD, demoing the performance of silicon that wasn't the final silicon, that was underperforming. So we might have saved them a bit of heartache there if someone had to come and filmed that and thought that was the actual performance.
Yeah, I'm sure someone would have noticed, but yeah, it was a bit interesting hearing about the, you know, it wasn't the final bin or whatever. So yeah.
Which, you know, I mean, it doesn't really matter ultimately, so it's not like a big blunder on AMD's behalf, though it could have led to some confusing, misleading articles perhaps suggesting that they still can't beat Intel's Core i9, so that would be a bit awful. But, you know, it's a trade show. A lot of stuff here is rushed for last minute sort of stuff, so yeah. But,
well, to be fair, when we were in the demo room, they were still finishing the demo room.
It wasn't complete and ready.
Yeah, people were like attaching things to walls and painting stuff.
Yeah,
so.
we had like early access, and
and
it was fortunate that we discovered that for them, so they could shut that down and not show it, which is what they ultimately did, because they couldn't solve that with what they had.
Yeah, apparently. So yeah, that was pretty interesting. I think the other good announcement that AMD made, obviously, at the show is changes to their platform support, and good changes, as in extending it from 2025 plus to now 2027 plus. I did try and grill AMD to get them to confirm on the record that Zen 6 would be supported, because there's multiple ways you could interpret their slides. It could mean, like we see with the new 5000 series, like the 5900 XT, the 5800 XT, I believe the two new, I should put in quotation marks, Zen 3 CPUs. You know, they could just refresh and refresh and refresh on the AM5 platform.
Go on forever.
So I wanted to get it on the record that Zen 6 would be supported. And unfortunately, the only people that we spoke to were giving very marketing answers.
Love those.
But the strong implication is that Zen 6 will be supported on the platform, giving at least 2 further generations for people that bought the original Zen 4 parts. In fact, I believe at one point the guy who was responding to one of my questions might have even slipped up and said future architectures were supported on the platform, even though they didn't want to talk about future architectures. But I think it's pretty clear that the extension in support to 2027 is specifically to give people the peace of mind that the future next generation architecture will be supported. And that's something that you've been very much on top of, wanting them to clarify and extend.
Yeah, if they're going to do that, it's a huge selling point for the AM5 platform, for Zen 4, for Zen 5. So if that's going to be a thing, there's no reason to hold back on that. Obviously, the reason they do hold back on it is because they want to make sure that it's technically possible. They don't want to be limited anyway or create some sort of mess like they kind of ran into with AM4, though ultimately they made it work. So that's good. And yeah, I think it's pretty safe to assume that Zen 6 will be just drop in, work, no worries, because that's strongly implied at this point. There's wriggle room there for legal reasons if something goes wrong, but they've certainly indicated that is the goal. That's their intention, to make that work. And they have left the door open for future support as well, depending on how future architectures develop and what can be possible there.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'd be expecting more than the 3 architectures on the AM5 platform, because with the original AM4, we did get 4 CPU releases, but one of them was Zen Plus, which was kind of that intermediary step. So, yeah, obviously a lot of the gains were driven by things like X3D coming to the Zen 3 line and those sorts of things. So that provided a lot of longevity for that platform. I think at this point I would probably say that Zen 7, just as a pure guess and speculation, is probably unlikely to be there, but you never know. Like, unless there was something like DDR6 memory to transition to.
Yeah, look, I'm really pushing for 3 generations. I think that's what they needed to provide to have a leg up on Intel, and it's a selling point. It's a huge selling point for platform support, in my opinion. So push quite hard for that. Anything after that, it's like, how great do you want to make the platform? Like, do you want a repeat of AM4 or not? So, if there's technical reasons why they can't do it, then I guess so be it. But if they can do it, then yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and I think with the AM5 platform, we obviously got the new X870 announcement, X870 versus X870E. AMD wasn't really willing to detail too much of the differences. Obviously, we've learned from motherboard vendors that it's the same single chipset versus dual chipset integration, but of course all X870 boards will support PCIe 5.0 for the M.2 slot and the main graphics slot, whereas obviously X670 only, some boards might only have it for graphics or M.2 depending on the board design. But apart from that, and USB 4 integrated on all boards, it's not a huge upgrade. It's not, in the vast majority of circumstances, it's not going to be worth upgrading from your X670 board to an X870 board. I expect the performance to be very similar, memory support to be pretty similar, even though they're claiming, high frequency support, whatever that means. I think the actual results for users will probably be pretty similar.
Yeah, so it's a platform flexibility thing.
Yeah.
Which is good. We've talked about it before in the past where, you really could have bought a B350 motherboard. If you're a gamer, that would have seen you through the entire AM4 generation. Like, there was really no need to upgrade your motherboard. If you're a gamer, do you need USB 4? Probably not. Do you need PCIe 5.0? Not at this point in time. PCIe 5.0 M.2s probably don't need that high-speed storage either. So it's of no loss if you don't have it.
Yeah, that's right.
If you're talking about high-end stuff, then it becomes a bit more relevant, and if you're doing more productivity-based stuff, it really depends on what conversation you're having. But I think for most gamers, PCIe 4.0, great. I mean, even 3.0 probably in a lot of instances is just fine. The loss there is insignificant. And the same applies to storage, because it's not those sequential read-writes that are relevant really for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, I think the inclination that AMD was giving was that like RDNA4 is likely to be a PCIe 5.0 generation, because AMD in their pre-briefing was talking about how next generation graphics is very soon going to support PCIe 5.0. So it's kind of like, okay, well, I guess that means that's an RDNA4 feature. Not that they explicitly said it, but even then, I don't expect that to have a significant impact on performance. If you've got a PCIe 4.0 X670 board, it's probably going to be just fine. But yeah, the things I'm really keen on seeing, obviously outside of the performance of Zen 5, is what happens to Zen 4 pricing, because the price points, they're low, but they're not, very, very enticing for mainstream buyers. I think there's still that discussion of, if you're really trying to cut costs, do you go with Zen 4 or do you go with Zen 3 on the AM4 platform, especially if you're building a new system. But hopefully we start to see things like the 7600 push down around, $180 would be nice, $170. And that will really give a kickstart to people who want to upgrade to this nice high performance platform. With that said, we're probably expecting the MSRPs of the new chips to be similar to previous gens, when they launch, that is. So yeah, can't expect them to go out and make the chips significantly cheaper for the new models, but if there's price movement for the older stuff, that still gives people, some nice choices to jump in.
Yeah, you'll probably see things get mixed up a bit more there once Arrow Lake actually comes to market. So once they've got some Intel competition, then there might be some aggressive price cuts on AMD's behalf, because they tend to do that.
Yeah, they like to keep things competitive. As we said, I think there'll be probably around a 3-month head start between Zen 5 and Arrow Lake. So AMD will have that exclusive window of going first and being able to set the tone, set the pricing of this CPU generation. But obviously Arrow Lake's going to be a pretty significant improvement. Not necessarily, I don't know whether there'll be an improvement in performance, because that still seems to be up in the air, but the architecture will be significantly changed, new process node. We're pretty much confirmed at this point that the CPUs will use less power. In other words, there's been some efficiency improvements, but obviously they're already hitting 6 gigahertz, so if they have to go backwards on frequency to compensate for IPC gains, there'll be performance implications there. But yeah, I think Zen 5 overall has been pretty much at least what we expected, but it was interesting to hear from people that sort of found it a little disappointing. There were some comments about it was being a bit mid, or not the sort of levels that they were expecting. But I feel like 16% IPC, even with no core frequency gains, is pretty acceptable.
Yeah, I think so. I'm not, shouting from the rooftops about how amazing it is.
Yeah, that's right.
But it's an acceptable improvement, especially given that it's the same socket, and you can just slot it onto existing motherboards that are already quite affordable. There's certainly affordable examples we can point to. So I think it's a positive for AM5 as a platform, and for those who have invested in it or are looking to invest in it. So it's good. Obviously, there's people who are disappointed they haven't got the X3D models yet. They weren't announced, but we weren't expecting that to be the case. So again, based on what we were expecting, I think it met expectations.
Yeah, I mean, I don't expect AMD at any point these days to release the X3D models at the same time. They've got a pretty good marketing strategy to go first with the normal models, then release the X3D models later. And there's been no indication that they're cancelling the X3D models or anything. Those are definitely still going to be a thing on this platform. And I would expect that CES is probably around the time frame for that. Again, it's hard to know, but that's just basically a guess on my part. Because wasn't it the Zen 4 X3D was announced at CES last year?
Possibly. It's a blur to me now. I forget. Yeah. I have to look it up.
Yeah. So, obviously
it was after though. That's the main point.
It was after. So I think it's going to be interesting to see where all those things lie and everything. But I personally felt that, at least if I didn't get my expectations up to ridiculous levels by really playing into the rumors or anything, and I think it's pretty much as expected. At least it's not a refresh, because things like 13th gen to 14th gen.
If you're expecting a minimum of 20% IPC improvement, an increase in core count for each of the product stack, and maybe a frequency improvement and stuff like that, guaranteed higher memory frequencies, all that sort of stuff, then that would be that'd be a very significant performance improvement, and you would be very disappointed with what was ultimately announced. But I think that would be pretty unrealistic.
Yeah. I mean, it's obviously next gen. They've got opportunities to improve all those things that they didn't improve this generation. If they're claiming this is some big architecture gain, then most likely we'll see gains in those other areas in the future. But I'm pretty keen on it. I think it was a good launch, and Intel, they didn't really do much in terms of Arrow Lake at Computex. I think I was expecting a little more from them relating to the desktop parts, because we did see they were saying on the show floor next gen, but we all know it said 890. I was expecting them to show more, but they went all in on Lunar Lake, their mobile parts, which is something that I don't particularly care all that much about. So it's still a waiting game for them to hear more about what to expect there, because really all that's up in the air. So it's interesting walking around the showroom floor and seeing all the Z890 motherboards without the Arrow Lake CPU announcements, and hearing a few tidbits about when those CPUs should be launching and some of the potential features. Obviously, they're still using DDR5 memory and those sorts of things, but a lot of the boards did have dual Thunderbolt 4 outputs. Was it Thunderbolt 4? Thunderbolt 5? Don't know.
4, I believe.
The latest generation, whatever that is, dual outputs on a lot of those boards. Some companies were being a bit cagey about exactly what was going on, but some board vendors have things like CAMM2 in the works for future or current generation platforms, so I expect that to ramp up a bit more in the coming weeks. And I guess we should probably talk about CAMM2 because that was one of the more interesting motherboard developments that we saw this year in person for the first time.
Yeah, it was. I'm particularly interested in it, to see how that plays out, how widely adopted it is, what it offers. So we've heard that you can get higher densities, shorter traces and therefore higher frequencies, better memory timings, so improved latency, and just easier to cool.
Yep.
You can, the installation and stuff like that, it's probably a little bit more difficult because you have to have between 4 and 5 screws, whereas previously you just shoved the DIMMs in. But that may eliminate some installation issues because I've installed DIMMs before and the CPU's not detected them properly, or it has detected them, but there's like a pin or two that maybe doesn't have correct contact because your load expo or whatever, it doesn't work, and just weird detection stuff like that. Like how often do you have to, when a system won't post or whatever, install one module and then it works? Yep. So whether CAMM2 solves that or not, I don't know. But the installation itself, probably a little bit trickier than just shoving modules into DIMM slots, but also not overly difficult. And the connector that goes between the pads on the motherboard and the pads on the back of the CAMM2 module, easily replaceable. Hopefully you'll be able to buy them for a reasonable price if you manage to damage or lose yours. So that's pretty neat as well. But yeah, I think just the cooling aspect of it's pretty good. I mean, people are going to miss their RGB memory because that's become a big part of builds and stuff. But I mean, they can do all kinds of things with that, can't they, on the heat sinks and stuff?
Yeah, exactly. I think it'll just be replaced with RGB sections on the motherboard covering that. Someone's going to put an LCD screen on there too, so don't rule that out because the physical dimensions would fit an LCD screen there. So that will happen at some point. You can definitely. ASUS will do that.
Yeah, that's the dumbest trend we saw at the show was the OLED screens and all that sort of stuff on the all-in-one liquid coolers. Yeah, I think ASUS had a wraparound one you could adjust.
It was bendable. They had like a button and it would like unfurl to be flat or curved.
And then I think I saw Height had quite big ones as well, screens. And look, maybe there's people that like it and it's a really cool, neat feature to them, but I think an LCD screen on top of your AIO is one of the dumber things I've seen for PC trends. Like,
it's been a thing before this Computex, but it seems to be ramping up a little bit.
We saw a lot more of them. So yeah, it's not unique to this show, but there are a lot more of them in the pipeline. I just think they're really dumb. But
I mean, and to be fair, the best cooler that not that we went around and saw all the cooling companies, to be fair, but one of the coolest looking coolers we saw was from Be Quiet, and that did not use an LCD screen. It had this sort of like RGB, almost like, I don't know, it was like fin array on the block that went onto the CPU.
Oh yes,
and that looked really cool. Yeah. That was just not a screen
the translucent,
system.
fin kind of, the acrylic-y type material. Yeah, that was
quite
cool.
Good.
That was cool. I for a second I was thinking of Noctua because we had a lot of cooler demonstrations there, and the new updated D15 looks really, really cool.
Yeah, surprising performance improvements that they've managed to get there, but that's Noctua for you. They always come out and surprise you with performance. But yeah, I think it was very exciting to speak to the motherboard vendors and how excited they were about CAMM2, specifically for like performance side of things. They were very keen on, this is most likely going to improve performance and achieve things that weren't achievable with the previous format. But obviously there was some hesitancy there with support and how early they're going to bring it to market and how much support they'll give it, because I think was it MSI, were they the board vendor that was working with, was it Kingston on the
that's right,
on the CAMM modules? So whether or not they sell that as a package deal or whether you get them separately, I'm not sure. But
yeah, I think there was a few memory makers there that did have CAMM2 products on display, so it's not exclusive to Kingston, but that was the partner with MSI for at least demonstrating it at the trade show. Kingston and MSI often work closely together. I think you'll find that all their desktop systems were loaded with Kingston DDR5 memory modules. So not sure what the relationship is there, but they seem to always work together. So whatever that's about. But back to the CAMM2, I think one of the other cool features is cooling.
Yeah.
So we spoke about the heat sinks and stuff, how the Project Zero ATX Z790 motherboard, and it is a Z790, not a Z890.
Yeah, because they're bringing it to market on the existing current gen as of now
LJ,
platform.
LJ 1700. So they've got a quite a big, thick, I don't know, what do you call them, heat sinks or heat spreaders when they don't have fins?
Yeah,
it's more of a heat spreader,
like
right?
Yeah, heat block. I don't know.
Yep.
Heat spreader, sure.
It's a heat capacitor. So that thing, that's fine, but it'd be very easy to make water blocks that you can screw down to the CAMM module and keep that DDR5 memory very nice and cool.
And that'll enable higher frequencies as time goes on, without cooling being a limitation.
Massive issue with DDR5 memory at high frequencies is cooling. So CAMM2 certainly addresses that. You better keep your memory very cool. Same thing with the PCIe 5.0 M.2 drives and even 4.0 drives. Thermal throttling was a big problem there.
Yeah, and the motherboards even have, I remember when you turned it around, you could see that there was a back plate as well on the back. So for the dual-sided modules, there's obviously a thermal pad into the board, into this back plate, which is going to further improve thermal. So it's not just like one side's going to get all the cooling. The designs that we've seen have got cooling on both sides to mitigate the issues with the dual-sided modules, which is very
that's right.
interesting.
There's thermal pads and then a heat sink, sort of like what you get on graphics cards behind the memory modules and stuff like that.
No, none of that plastic crap that doesn't work. It was actually metal, so...
So that'll help. I mean, obviously, if you stick a water block on it, you'll be sucking the majority of the heat out of the front of the board, but some does leak through the PCB. It's
interesting. Hopefully... Yeah, a lot of there was a lot of, this is just a prototype. We're not sure whether we'll bring it to X870 and Z890, but I hope that they do go through with producing those boards because, it's probably not going to take off massively. Like, it's not like the majority of people are going to go immediately to CAMM with their next, or CAMM2 with their next board. They're probably going to stick to DDR5 for the most part because it'll be cheaper, more accessible. But for people that do want the best performance and they really want to push things to the next level, then, that sort of board will be the way to go.
Yeah, and some of the negativity I've seen around CAMM2, because we've obviously been reading the comments.
Yeah.
I think probably the biggest criticism is the lack of flexibility with being able to either increase memory capacity. Well, that's the main one, really, increase memory capacity. So people have put forth, arguments that, well, if I get a 16 gigabyte CAMM2 module, if I want to get a 32 gigabyte CAMM module, the 16 gigabyte version I have to, throw out, sell, kind of becomes e-waste. But I think with the current generation platforms, I don't even think there will be 16 gigabyte CAMM2 modules for desktop systems.
Even DDR5 and 16 gig kits makes no sense. It's like not that much cheaper than a 32 gig kit.
There are very few kits because of that reason.
Yeah.
So you can pretty well rest assured that they're going to start at a minimum of 32 gigabytes, and a lot of them will probably be 64, which is, my understanding, is complete overkill for gaming. Hopefully there will be a 32 gigabyte option, and if you buy that, realistically, that's going to be what you're going to stick with for the lifetime of the platform. And Tim and I were actually talking about this the other day because in a few weeks I plan on setting out to do because I've had so many requests, to do a how much RAM do gamers need update video, because it was about 4 years ago that I did one. Sort of haven't had time when we get to the end of the year to update it, or it sort of, in my opinion, hasn't really made sense because for a long time that video was relevant. But an update's coming. I'll probably approach it a bit differently to how I've done past content. But we were discussing the argument of future-proofing, whether you should buy more memory than you need now. Is that a good idea?
Yeah.
And we've got the AM4 platform as a great example to look back upon. History tells a story there. And we went back to 1 year after the first AM4 CPUs were released. So you got Zen, a year gone by. How much was DDR4 memory? And a DDR4 3600 32 gigabyte kit was about $450 based on the information we saw. I've got to do some firm research on this for my actual content, but Tim and I just, we were spitballing, having a bit of a look. Looked like it was around $400, $450 for that, which makes it about $225 for a 16 gigabyte kit. So that seems pretty reasonable based on what I remember for half decent memory. So we fast forwarded to today, and to buy a 32 gigabyte DDR4 kit today, it was about $60 to $70 for the same thing, wasn't it?
I think so.
So that is a substantial difference many years later, admittedly, but it doesn't really make sense to have bought a 32 gigabyte kit for $400 back then, really regardless of how much money you were spending. I mean, if money's no object or whatever, sure, get the 32 gigabyte kit. But in terms of economics and value, it just didn't make sense. You were better off buying a 16 gigabyte kit. And then later on, if you decided you needed another 16 gigabyte kit, buy one for $70 and you've still saved money. So you sort of upgrade when you need to. And that's been great for boards with 4 DIMM slots. But also, you could just buy a 32 gigabyte kit today, and it's less than half the price of the 16 gigabyte kit.
Yes.
So whichever way you slice it, whichever way you go about it, it really didn't make sense to spend a ton of money back then. And it'll be the same situation now. If you're gaming, I suspect it doesn't make sense to spend twice as much on 64 gigabytes.
Yeah.
You might as well get 32 gigabytes now, because by the time games genuinely use more than 32 gigabytes, the 32 gigabyte kit will be less than half what you paid for it now.
Yeah, so if a theoretical board had 2 CAMM slots, you'd probably still be better off getting the one 32 gigabyte kit.
That's right.
And then later, yeah, you could buy an extra 32 gig kit, but you wouldn't be that much worse off, many years down the line, just throwing it out, even though e-waste bad, obviously, but throwing it out and buying the 64 gig kit. It's probably going to be the case where by the time you want to get the 64 gig or high capacity kits, you'll be spending around the amount or less than what adding the second kit at the start would have been.
Because what we saw with DDR4 and AM4 was, in 2018, it was a $225 US proposition, whereas today
to add
the
additional
16 gig, the additional 16 gig, whereas today it's $35. So
yeah, exactly.
And you definitely did not need more than 16 gigabytes of RAM. I don't know if I've said VRAM at any point, but hopefully I haven't. RAM for gaming. Yes. You just didn't need it. Look, if you're like, but Steve, I play this modded game that uses, okay, fine.
Get more memory then.
You understand your specific use case, fine. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to just the general gamer that's playing typical AAA titles and games like Fortnite and Call of Duty and whatever. But yeah, we're obviously at a point in time now where 32 gigabytes is of benefit. You can certainly still play on a budget AM4 system a whole slew of games with 16 gigabytes of RAM, and it probably won't really be affecting performance. But we are at a point in time now where 32 gigabytes is of benefit.
Yes, and obviously with new technologies, there's always trade-offs to achieve the things that they're trying to achieve. So with things like CAMM, they're obviously trying to improve the link between the CPU and the memory by shortening traces, improving performance. They're trying to make it a more compact module, so it takes up less space on the board. I mean, obviously the difference between the DIMM slot and CAMM is that it's gone from vertical to flat, basically. So the space saving is a little different, but obviously the
double-sided, I believe,
the module itself is physically smaller. And then there's cooling benefits as well. By placing in that orientation, there's the cooling advantages we talked about earlier. So to get those benefits, the trade-off is the board can only fit one of those modules. So it's kind of a thing where if you want memory speeds to continue to increase and get more performance out of memory, they have to sacrifice something. And the current thing that they're sacrificing is the ability to add more modules at the same time. It's not even the case where it's not upgradable, because it is upgradable. These boards, you will be able to swap out the memory. It's just that you won't be able to upgrade it in a way like, laptops sometimes have one DIMM slot and the other amount is soldered, right? So you can't upgrade the soldered memory, but you can only figure out with one DIMM.
And there are real drawbacks to 4 DIMMs versus 2 DIMMs.
Yeah, there's reduced frequency.
That's become more and more of a problem, which is why we hear from more and more people saying, I don't care if the board, because I review motherboards and I like the flexibility of having 4 DIMMs, but more and more people are pushing back against that and saying, I don't care, Steve, like I'd rather just have 2 DIMMs for higher frequencies. If I upgrade, I'll be buying new memory anyway. Yeah,
I mean, my 7950X system, I've got 4 DIMMs in mine. I've got 192 gigabytes of memory, which is the absolute maximum that I think they've now gone up to 256 configurations. But at the time, 48 gig sticks were the maximum that you could get. And the DDR5 speeds I'm running is very low. It's like DDR5, it's either 3600 or 4000 across the 4 sticks, which is fine for, productivity work. Yeah, but for gaming, it's like, that's totally not good.
Yeah, their capacity trumps bandwidth performance, and the bandwidth is ample anyway, so it's not a problem.
Yeah.
So really the whole upgrading angle, it's kind of an old school way of thinking, and because back when I used to build computers, we often, because memory was so expensive, we often did add another 4 gigabytes or 2 gigabytes or whatever it was. But these days,
you'd have uneven configurations, like
all kinds
whatever.
Of things. We're going back to single channel memory and stuff. And so it's not really a thing anymore. I don't think it's a drawback, and I don't think it's going to be a problem. If you buy a 32 gigabyte DDR5 kit or CAMM module for gaming today, It's going to be a while before that's a problem. We need to change it.
Yeah, and I think it's going to, if anything, if you want those high capacities, you should be able to get those at faster speeds. So in my example, where my 7950X system, a CAMM2 version with 192 gigabytes of memory would potentially be like a flexible gaming system. I could do a bit of gaming on it and the productivity work as well, because the frequency wouldn't be so limited in the 4 DIMM configuration. But obviously, you know, that's something we'll have to see where that goes, what the actual speed differences will be between, you know, CAM for high capacity versus DIMM for high capacity. But it's looking very promising. It looks like a genuine upgrade that has a lot of benefits. And I totally agree with you on the upgrade side of things. I think that's, for most people, should be a non-issue or very close to a non-issue.
Yep, absolutely.
So what else was interesting at the show was, you know, the things that weren't there. And there were some things that I probably was expecting more of. We've already talked a little bit about Arrow Lake, and some things I definitely wasn't expecting. There were some people, we did see some feedback from people who watched the NVIDIA keynote being disappointed that the 50 series was not being shown. We were very confident going into Computex that the GeForce 50 series was not going to be announced, teased, talked about in any way, and that turned out to be the case. And even on the showroom floor, there were no real hints of the 50 series anywhere, no prototype things, prototype boards or whatever. It was very much that's a future sort of product, and it seems like the GeForce 50 series is still many months away. That's pretty much it on that one, really.
As expected. I mean, we said it in the Q&A series that there's not going to be GeForce, despite rumors, they won't be shown there. At least that's our expectation, and well.
Yeah, it sounds like that's more towards the end of the year. We're not really sure what the timelines will be for each of those GPUs, but yeah, no one was really talking about 50 series at the show. So NVIDIA's thing was all AI. So sorry to the people like me who had to watch for 2 hours to see if there was any announcements, and there really wasn't. But yeah, no 50 series teaser, and that was pretty evident when you walk around the show floor. All of it was sort of the AI side of things. The thing though that did surprise me a little bit was no RDNA4 teaser. It seems like there's been rumors about RDNA4 coming for quite a while, but even then it sounds like that is also still quite far away and not coming at a time that it would make sense to tease it at Computex.
Yes, well, I got some leaked information about that. Like, we're not breaking a leak here or anything. It's more confirming leaked information that's already been out there. But basically, what I was told by a few different people at the show that absolutely know what they're talking about is that it is coming around CES. This is RDNA4, that is. CES release. And unfortunately, yeah, it's going to be mid-range at best. So there won't be a full product stack there. It won't be fully competing with the GeForce 50 series. There will be no 7900 XTX-like product. So it's going to be more like what we saw from RDNA, which they're going backwards there, which is really disappointing. So probably something like a 5700 XT, whatever the equivalent there is with RDNA4 for a mid-range product.
Yeah, RDNA4 was expecting to see teasers, still a bit far away. And I think the most disappointing thing for me, not so much the mid-range thing, because that's sort of been rumored for a while now, is more that AMD is once again most likely not able to get out their next generation of graphics cards before the GeForce 50 series, which we're expecting to be a little before then. And it seems like the rumors, I don't know how accurate they were earlier, but it was making it sound like RDNA4 was pretty ready, like pretty much we can release it, at least AMD could release it at any moment, it's ready to go. But again, they'll be late to the party on that one. That said, I don't expect mid-range GeForce 50 series parts to be available before the mid-range RDNA4 parts, which will be mid-range only apparently. But yeah, it's just, again, I feel like the Radeon division, you probably will have seen, actually maybe not, there's an upcoming discussion with Gamers Nexus talking about, maybe it's on their channel, about some Radeon related stuff.
That is on the Gamers Nexus channel.
Yeah, sort of relating to that discussion is, you know, the sort of failings of the Radeon division and inability to execute on some areas. I don't know whether they were actually able to get it out first. So maybe I'm just talking out my ass here about the execution of these parts. But yeah, it's a bit disappointing that they're not able to, at least theoretically, rumors say, they're not able to be at the forefront of the next generation. When I would feel that if you're making your parts mid-range only, that you'd really want to get them out earlier first and really set the generation as like, we're providing a big price to performance improvement, whereas releasing them later sounds more like the typical AMD thing of, let's look at what NVIDIA's doing and either copy them or make it just slightly cheaper than what they've done.
Yeah, don't know. I mean, they can always price cut. Not sure if there was technical reasons, if they were meant to be out earlier and they were trying to hit higher performance targets. Can they, sort of had similar problems with RDNA4 in that sense? Don't know.
Yeah.
Don't know what the reason is. Don't know why it's happened the way it has, but apparently it has.
Yeah, so we'll see. So it should be at least an interesting CS next year from what we're hearing. There should be a few things around then with GeForce 50 series, with RDNA4, with X30 CPUs, which will make it a pretty banger of a show by the sounds of things. So yeah, maybe we'll head over to America for CES at the start of next year. Probably a few things to sort out there, but it could be the first time that we attend CES if that's the big sort of announcements that are happening there. So yeah, I'm honestly, Computex has been a great show so far. Well, it's pretty much over at this point.
It's been a great show.
But it has been a great show. So I think there's going to be a lot of interesting things happening in. I was thinking it'd be more like the next 6 months, but it sounds like almost the next 12 months. We're going to be getting new CPUs from both Intel and AMD this year for sure. And then GPU launches 6 months-ish from now. So for people that are interested in building PCs, this next period from now on, I think is going to be really flat out with a lot of very exciting content. And hopefully that'll be brought up by good, exciting games that people play and want to be, upgrading, improving their PCs and really getting back into the PC ecosystem. So yeah, I totally understand if, people have been not overly enthused about the last 6 months or so from the PC market. It honestly, not much has been happening, and we've both been sort of feeling that with the work that we've been trying to do, but it seems like that's going to be a total reversal in the next 6 months, which is really exciting. And
can't wait.
Yeah, coming to the show always invigorates us, and very exciting to see all the companies doing things. So yeah, we'll take a little break and we'll talk about, well, not our boring lives, but maybe some of the other stuff that's been happening here at the show.
Sure.
All right, we're back. Now, normally at this part of the podcast, we talk about our boring lives, but let's be honest, we've flown internationally to another city and we're covering a major trade show. So it's pretty hard to have a boring life when we're currently staying at a nice hotel and covering all sorts of exciting PC products and have been spending most of the days working and doing those sorts of things.
I'm exhausted by our exciting lives.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to go back to my boring life.
Yeah, there's no lawn mowing around here.
Yeah,
even though it is quite lush and
I don't know.
Here.
Don't know if they'd appreciate if I drove my lawnmower through the garden here. It'd be fun.
Yeah.
Probably get us kicked out and we wouldn't be able to come back. So.
Yep, I would say so. So, yeah, I guess some of the things that have been happening that is not related to the show has been just trying the local food here in Taipei, which honestly, Taipei I think it's probably got one of the best places for food that I've been to. There's just a variety of different cuisines that are here, and it's all the places we've gone to have been really good.
Phenomenally good, yeah.
This year and last year, and some of the snacks and things. I always find Taipei a really great place to go for drinks, especially if you want non-alcoholic drinks. The variety that you get here is really, really good. Compared to at least Australia. So
yeah, we're a bit boring. We like our alcohol too much.
Yeah, it's been good. One of the first nights we had a dinner and it was this, what was it, Japanese?
It was Japanese barbecue, basically.
Yeah, that was right. And Steve's a meat fan, so he loves going out and grabbing a whole bunch of meat. And what did we order? We ordered they brought out this one particular type of meat and we're we want more of that. So we went ham on that. That was very nice.
Yeah, we waddled out of there after a few hours of eating. And it was mostly different types of meats, so that was good. And I'm shouting the boys' dinner tonight. So I'm taking just the Harbour and Box crew out, and we're getting, I think, another barbecue style thing. So Chris booked that in. But anyway, we'll take Bale, Tim and Chris, and we'll go eat till we are just about to explode. So that should be fun.
Yeah, so I always enjoy that part of Computex. The trade show floor is always interesting to see the different products. But when you have, dinners and things, we meet up with, it's really the only opportunity we get to meet up with people like Steve from Gamers Nexus, or, Jared if he was here, though he's not here this year. What's he doing, Jared? But we ran into Paul on the show floor. He's a really nice guy. Love getting along with him and chatting with him, and all those various different creators that we see. We live pretty far away in Australia, so it's people always asking, oh, why don't you collab with Gamers Nexus or one of those channels? It's
we'd like to.
20 hours of plane travel, it's pretty difficult. Remote stuff's never as good. But when everyone's here and you're just constantly running into people and chatting, and the fans as well, there's been people who've come up and have been very friendly, want to get photos and stuff, and even, some channels that,
other YouTubers and stuff have been really good.
Yeah, so that's always a nice part of the show, and you get to see the contacts as well that we work with at these companies in the flesh at these times. So yeah, it's a really good show from that perspective. So it's kind of like the bonuses of going to Computex and flying to Taipei. It's not just 10 hours of travel to sit and have to make videos all day. It's a lot of other interesting things.
Yeah, it's been good, a lot of fun.
The one mistake I did make though is that just behind us, if you're watching the video version, is the hotel pool, which is like one of those infinity pools where you can sort of, look out. And we were filming a Q&A over there just before, and it was pretty warm, it was pretty humid, and I was regretting not bringing any sort of swimming appropriate clothes.
Could have had a dip after the
yeah,
Q&A.
That's what I was feeling. So yeah, the weather this week in Taipei has been amazing. It's usually very warm and very humid, like 30 degrees, like very high humidity. It's been cooler this year, which has been good.
Well, when we started filming the podcast, it was still quite hot.
Yeah,
it's cooled off now. It's quite very nice.
Yeah, so our video editor, Balin, he had the right idea. He brought swimming stuff, so he could go and have a dip after
He's a man of leisure.
Videos. Yeah, that's right. I think, is he hitting up the gym at the moment?
He is at the gym, yes.
While we're doing this. So yeah, he's getting some break time, which is good.
He's making me feel older and fatter than normal.
But yeah, it's been surprising. Like, every time we've come out here to film, there's like no one using the pool. And we saw the pool, we're like, yeah, let's go in there.
It's because we hired it. We're of that status now with the podcast where we hire entire outdoor venues for just Tim and I to sit back and talk.
Yeah.
So that's what's happened here, if anyone was wondering.
I would like to say that that's the case.
That is, no, we're sticking with that story, Tim.
Okay, cool.
Oh, if we could do something about the planes though.
Yeah, it seems to be a flight path here, but there's no actual airport nearby, which is a little confusing to me. They must curve around or something, but yeah, planes, annoying. So yeah, I guess that'll pretty much wrap us up for this Computex, I don't know, recap sort of episode on the Hardware Unboxed podcast. As I said, we are planning on filming a couple more, or recording, if you listen to the audio version, a couple more podcasts here from the Computex scene here in Taipei. So yeah, there'll be a bit more content to go out, and yeah, I think there'll be a few other videos from Computex that we haven't published on Hardware Unboxed at the moment as well by the time this podcast goes live. So yeah, check out those. Obviously, if you want to subscribe, listen to the audio version. The video version of this is probably more interesting than usual because both Steve and I are in person and we're sitting in front of this nice...
I can do this.
Yeah, yep, love it. So love that. Nice leafy backdrop. So check out the video version on the YouTube channel if you do listen to the audio feed. But if not, the audio feed's probably fine. And yeah, obviously we're not using our normal studio recording setup, so that explains the different audio. So yeah, thanks for listening and we'll see you in the next one.